This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony Nippy Ames, and this is A Little Bit Culty.
We woke up from a cult, and that journey was captured in The Vow on HBO and in my memoir, Scarred.
Now, in this podcast, we break down the shame and secrets that make these experiences so destructive with honest conversations on how seemingly benign groups can cross into the cultiverse and how to spot and recover from trouble if it happens to you.
Each week, we bring in experts, survivors, and whistleblowers to explore red flags, resilience, and even share a few laughs, because sometimes you gotta laugh.
Subscribe to our Patreon for early and ad-free listening, some live Q&A, and exclusive content at patreon.com/alittleBitCulty.
Welcome to Season 8 of A Little Bit Culty.
Welcome back, everybody, to A Little Bit Culty.
Today's guest is Melissa Duge Spiers, an award-winning essayist, screenwriter, and advocate for religious abuse victims who uses TikTok and Instagram under the name The Glory Hole, with a capital W.
I see what you did there.
To expose what she calls the biggest end times cult you've never heard of, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The SDA, as we'll call it in this episode, runs the second largest education system and fourth largest healthcare system in the world, while hiding a dark interior of sexual obsession, abuse, end times terror, and bizarre dietary and clothing restrictions.
I was amazed I hadn't heard of this. So
Same.
This episode blew my mind. It's hard to blow our minds these days.
It really is.
So Melissa is a fourth-generation SDA survivor, and her captivating memoir, Holy Disobedience, chronicles her journey out and the devastating discovery that her father had been a serial child predator within the organization. That revelation sent her into a spiral of discovery, deconstruction, and ultimately advocacy, using her voice to help other survivors find healing and expose the rot beneath the surface.
In this conversation, Melissa pulls back the curtain on the SDA's culty control tactics, the complicity that enabled her father's abuse, and what it takes to rebuild your life after everything you were taught turns out to be a lie designed to protect predators. Sound familiar? Please enjoy part 1 and 2, but stay to the end of part 2 for some very good news about this organization.
You're doing cliffhanger stuff.
Stay to the end. It's worth it.
Here's part 1 with Melissa Duge Spiers.
Melissa, welcome to A Little Bit Culty.
Thank you. I am so happy to be here.
We are so happy to have you. I think this is crazy that we have done over 300 episodes of A Little Bit Culty and not yet covered the Seventh-day Adventists.
Oh,
So-
I'm sure
Yes.
they're thrilled. That's just the way they like it.
How this is under our radar is kind of embarrassing for us, considering we know about all these things. And this one, I'll let you describe how big they are and how they've been able to do it. But I was shocked to find out some of the analytics about the Advents and how big they are.
Yeah. They are, I mean, you're not alone in that. I mean, no one's ever heard of them. I hear that over and over again. And it's true. Growing up, you just felt like such an incredible freak because people's eyes would just glaze over when you said that you were Adventist. So.
And they're bigger than the Mormons and the Baptists.
Just to give you a little history, because a lot of people, I'm sure your viewers probably don't know much about it either. They consider themselves a fundamentalist Christian organization. They believe every word of the Bible is true. And other than that, they feel they are kind of special because they have a prophet who gave them the one and only truth. They are the true remnant, but they really do think of themselves as mainline Christian. But what they are is a classic end times cult. They are big into Daniel and Revelation. Every generation has thought that Jesus is returning in their lifetime and we're going to be persecuted for our faith and blah, blah, blah. So it is kind of a sister organization to the JWs and the Mormons. Actually, there are a lot of connections there. Charles Taze Russell, the guy who started the JWs, was actually an Adventist pastor at one point before he started. And the SDA prophet, Ellen White, who I'll give you the tea on later.
Yes, please.
Her distant cousin was one of Joseph Smith's wives. And there's a lot of the behavioral controls in Mormonism and Adventism are exactly the same. So there's a lot, of course, they all think they're one true and special, right? But
right.
So they all came out of the Millerite movement in the mid 1800s when Miller predicted that Jesus was coming back, I think in 1844. There were a ton of cults that I'm sure you guys know at that time was very fertile for cult building in the United States. And most of them died out after Jesus didn't come back in 1844. But the Mormons and the Adventists went on partly because they had these charismatic prophets, right? So the Adventists had a prophet named Ellen G. White, which is really ironic that they had a woman because to this day, they will not ordain women.
Wild.
Yeah.
That is wild.
Ridiculous.
How do they square that circle?
Oh, they're so good at complete cognitive dissonance. They don't really square it. They just don't talk about it, And women are allowed to preach and they're allowed to participate. They just can't be ordained. And somehow, I don't know. So Ellen White was hit in the head with a rock when she was about 9 and incurred some serious frontal lobe traumatic brain injury. She had lifelong seizures, hallucinations, etc. She was in a coma for several weeks. Guess when she came out of all of that, she decided all of the hallucinations and everything else were from God.
Is that the story? Is that true?
No, that's true. That part is absolutely true. Yeah.
Okay.
And her family was also involved in the hat making business, which involved a lot of, I guess, is it mercury that gives you Mad Hatter's disease?
Yeah, Mad Hatter.
Yeah. And she participated in some of that too as a child. So she was getting a lot of behavioral alterations and mental alterations from several sources. But she interpreted all of this as straight messages from God. And she would all of her life say that she was given visions from God. Her visions often involved enriching herself or punishing people she didn't like in the church. But Adventists believe to this day that she had the spirit of prophecy and she was divinely inspired and she was next to God, basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
How does she get power, as a woman in that time?
That I have, because I hate her so much to this day that I really have tried not to know very much about her, really more than I had force-fed to me. She did marry very young, and a lot of people say that her husband, can't even remember his name right now, was the power behind the throne. And that did legitimize her for quite a bit, obviously. And so the two of them were kind of a team, James White. And she also built a very close set around her. And part of that set that helped build the church was John Harvey Kellogg, who, if your listeners don't know anything about Kellogg, he was a real prize. He
like Kellogg cereal.
Right, exactly. So he started something called the Battle Creek Sanatorium, which was a prototype hospital. He was a doctor, and lots of people like U.S. presidents, royalty from Europe came to the Battle Creek Sanatorium for his various cures and things. But he was obsessed with basically curing sex of any kind. Apparently the man never had sex his entire life. He didn't consummate his marriage. He was obsessed with controlling masturbation. And so he invented cornflakes as part of the high fiber was supposed to get rid of lust.
That's not true.
No, right? It's ridiculous. But they really built up the Adventist church with this health message, which again was a popular trend in Victorian times. Yep. I mean, Sylvester Graham, they were kind of cobbing off of him a bit. Graham, a few years earlier, had developed the graham cracker, which again was fiber will dampen lust and prevent masturbation. It was a big obsession back then.
Well, the health world is always ripe for
quacks.
Coercive beliefs.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just a perfect storm because that, of course, was high Victorian times too, right? When they were literally putting bloomers on piano legs because legs were sexy. It was just this weird time of obsession with preventing sexual everything. And then, so Kellogg and Ellen and James built the Adventist church largely around a health message along with the end times thing. And to this day, the Adventist health message is their big claim to fame. They are the reason of the blue zones. They own the blue zones now. So their health message is basically all the dietary rules in the Bible. So no shellfish, the same things that Judaism embraces, no shellfish, no pork, etc. But then Ellen and Kellogg expanded on that greatly with no caffeine, no tea, no, of course, alcohol or tobacco, etc., and no spices, because spices heat your body up and then you might do something sexual. So we were raised Adventist, extremely bland vegetarian food, and no coffee, no soda.
Is any of this stuff rooted in forensics, or is it all ideology based?
I mean, I would say it's all ideology.
Okay.
It sounds like it's all control. It's not based on any
That's it. It's, classic cult stuff. I don't know if you guys have probably even had Daniela Mestiniak-Young on and she talks a lot about how cults control several big pegs, right? Yeah. Sex, food, body, etc. And so Adventists were doing all of that and still do.
And also classic bite model, behavior, emotions, information.
We'll get into that later too, for sure. So they built it up into now the worldwide, it is about 25 million worldwide members, which is larger than the Mormons and the SBC. Wow. It's always a little bit suspect because those numbers come from the churches themselves. And of course, they like to inflate those numbers, right? As far as I know, my name may still be on the books, except they probably dislike me enough now that they took it off. But when I tried to get my name taken off 25 years ago, they wouldn't do it, So those numbers you have to take with a grain of salt, but still enormous organization. Right. Within the United States, their population has been shrinking. Basically in all westernized portions of the world, Europe, Australia, their membership has been shrinking for several generations, but they're aggressive missionaries. Typical, just gross colonial model, sweeping into places that don't have many resources and offering medical care and health, dietary everything, and building wells and building schools. And then, hey, come join our church. And oh, by the way, your indigenous culture is evil. So I think for the past couple of generations, the largest portion of Adventists is now growing in Africa. But the centralized control of Adventism is still a group of crusty, nasty old white men in Washington, D.C., and they control the whole group.
Similar to the Jehovah's Witness and Mormon Church.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, they all operate on the same model.
Let's take a break from the cultiverse, shall we? Here's a word from our sponsors.
If you love the ritual of a little evening drink, but could really do without the fuzzy head and questionable life choices the next morning, meet Vesper from Peak. It's a non-alcoholic, adaptogenic aperitif that keeps the ritual, the romance, and the cheers moment just without the alcohol. Vesper is made with calming ingredients like L-theanine, tart cherry, lemon balm, and elderflower, so you actually feel your body relax, your shoulders drop, your jaw unclenches, the whole vibe shifts, but it's not sleepy or dull. Botanicals like gentian and damina give you a subtle lift so you feel social, present, and maybe even a little flirty. Flavor-wise, it's lovely. Sour cherry, bright grapefruit citrus, and herbal bitters. Pour it over ice, top it with sparkling water, light a candle. Suddenly, your Tuesday night feels a little more like a European vacation. In fact, it's the drink that lets you stay fully present for the conversation, the connection, the moment, and still wake up feeling amazing the next day, which I have to because, for example, tomorrow I have a full day of baseball for both kids, but I'm going over to see a friend tonight, and we are planning to do a Korean skincare spa night. And while I would probably normally bring some rosé, tonight I'm bringing the Vesper. Vesper makes it still like a fun night, and we can do the face masks and all that and cheers, but I know that I'll be able to get through my big sports day tomorrow, and that's what I need. Set a new standard for how you relax and connect. Access 10% off for life and redefine your nightly ritual today at peaklife.com/culty. That's PIQUE life.com/culty. Enjoy.
Escape's over. Let's return to our regularly scheduled cult talk. So their message is failing in Western culture, stiff competition probably, and so they're outsourcing to vulnerable cultures.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah. I used to say an offering, like we always ask, like, what's the hook?
It's kind of the love bombing aspect.
Well, the hook is based, sounds like, on real physical necessity and need.
Right, exactly. And that's how my family got drawn in many generations before, and we'll talk about that. But I think one of the big reasons that a lot of people don't talk about enough in the cult circles is the generational. So you're seeing it really in Western parts of the world with not only, I think, Adventism, but Mormonism and stuff. When you pull in people based on that basic needs thing, education, food, etc. So that first generation is so grateful and they're so dedicated to the church because, oh my gosh, you really improved our lives. And then the second generation is more educated and they're more affluent and they're, we're into this. It's great. It's given us a lot of advantages. And by the third generation, those kids are educated, they're fed, they're whatever. And they're starting to be like, this sucks. This is way too controlling. Yeah. And so I was third, fourth generation. And by that time, we're all like, fuck this, no way. And so I think the cults kind of phase themselves out in enough generations if they're operating on that model.
Yeah, especially also with technology and having like a view of the outside world.
Yeah.
Well, also the things that the survival mechanisms that serve them are obsolete.
Exactly.
A generation or two later, and instead of upgrading them and doing self-reflection and adapting to modern times, it's conservative versus liberal. It's kind of like, do you know what I mean? Like too much conservatism implodes on itself and too much freedom will destroy the structure. So you have to find that kind of line.
Exactly. Totally.
Or you're a cult if you don't solve it.
Totally. So Adventists, to help with that whole missionaryizing, so they have, unlike the JWs, they are big into education. They're big in healthcare, both things. They have the third or fourth. The numbers kind of change on these top 10 lists, but they are always in the top 5 list of largest education systems in the world. The Catholics, the Mormons, and the Adventists kind of trade around there. And also in healthcare systems. They're right behind the Catholics in terms of the largest and biggest healthcare systems. They have a really kind of renowned medical school based in Loma Linda, California. And so that's part of their whole missionary push is they do education and medical care. And that's how my family got sucked in. So my great grandmother on my father's side was a very poor single mother. Her husband had died and she had 5 kids to raise in the deep South. And the Adventist church gave her a job in their laundry at their local university and they educated her children. And it was a great tactic for the Adventist church. It's worked well. Now they've had multiple generations of increasingly affluent people devoted to them, So all of the men in my family for several generations became Adventist doctors and, away you go. And it's only in my generation that we've all started to splinter. There are very few of us in my extended cousin circle that are still Adventist, but we're the first generation to break away from it in the whole larger family.
I guess for me, the thing that reading, the 3/4 of the book is how the hell did they stay under the radar? I know they weren't preachy. They weren't on television. They didn't do the marketing that some of the stuff, because I remember growing up and seeing stuff on marketing on television and it was repellent to me.
Yeah.
Seeing a preacher repellent. So they must have been sensitive to some sort of what works marketing wise, what doesn't.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how they're able to stay under the radar and maintain what they maintained without recruiting in the aggressive way that maybe all the others have. And why is it worth 5 years in and doing our first episode on it now? And kind of, does that make sense?
Yeah. They're incredibly insular and they still to this day don't really believe in being a presence. Like they didn't believe in television or radio or, I was raised without a television completely. Since I left, they have their own television station and their own radio stations that are just Adventist programming, but they don't join the world at all. They don't believe in putting a presence out there, even to missionary eyes. They will sometimes go door to door and sell their books, their prophets' books. They're extremely anti-media of any kind, really. And my personal opinion is, they love being unknown because then they can hide all their shit.
They're sensitive enough to know that they don't appeal.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. In fact, the Adventist church just put out this ridiculous post on social media, because now they're trying to get into social media, but they're pathetic at it. And so the rest of us just laugh at them ridiculously.
Late to the game.
Yeah.
What's the handle?
It's just Adventist Church, I think, at Adventist Church. And it was on Instagram, I think last week. And it was all about like, people call us a cult and we might be weird, but we're not a cult. And then their following slides were, well, yeah, we're culty, but that doesn't define us. And then a couple slides onward was like, yeah, we have a lot of really awful people, but they don't define us either. And it was like, what are you doing? You know, like they have no concept.
They need to hire a better PR firm.
Yeah.
And there's only 219,000 followers.
Okay, that's my question.
Yeah.
On social media, anyway.
That makes sense.
Yeah. No, because they're just not a presence. I mean, some of their universities have like 200 followers, you know, and those universities are huge. Their media has a dismal.
Yeah, that's bad.
It's really bad.
Yeah, no, when you go...
People listening.
Editing
team, don't cut this out because I want people to go look to the Instagram page and just check out their branding. It's just...
That's not going to do it.
I see it now. We're weird, but we're not a cult.
Yes, right?
Wow.
Isn't that funny?
Methinks she does protest too much.
They don't even understand their enemy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I get the picture.
So is there anything any like sort of history or anything that we need to know about that? And from now on, let's say it says Seventh-day Adventist. Can we say SDA? Like you do in your books?
Yeah, let's say SDA because
SDA is too much. We got to save time to hear about your
Advent, but whatever.
Okay.
It's kind of the street name.
But quick thing, wasn't David Koresh a spinoff of SDA?
Oh, this is one of my favorites. Editors don't cut this one either because it chaps the Adventist butt collectively so much.
Oh. Did you know? Sorry, Melissa, tangent. Oh. That's one of our segments. What chaps your ass or what chaps? But this chaps the ass of the SDA?
Yes.
Oh,
they hate having this brought up. Yes. Not only was Koresh Adventist to the end, but the Branch Davidians were also, and they were actually a separate organization until he took them over, and they were both spin-offs of the Adventist Church. So the Branch Davidians split off in like the 1940s or something. And again, it's so funny. The Adventists spawn all these cults. They spawned the Anthill Kids, Marcus Wesson, like all these horrible cults. And the Adventists just love to deny them once they've gone just a step or two too far with the end times bullshit is usually what it is. So the Branch Davidians took the Daniel and Revelation end times obsession that is a core part of the Adventist Church. They just took it a little more crazy. And so they got there. I don't know if it was mutual or if they did get technically booted out of the church, but they started their own thing. So that was 1940. And then Koresh was raised Adventist. His mother was Adventist. He was obsessed with Daniel and Revelation. And he eventually did get kicked out of the Adventist church, I think, for being too obsessive, too freaky. And so he went and took over the Branch Davidians. Their leaders were very old at the time. And he ended up like being the young boy toy, basically, of the female. She had been married to the original founder of the Branch Davidians, and Koresh just swept in and literally got in bed with her and became the head of the Branch Davidians. Even until the big fiery debacle, he was still largely Adventist. When you see interviews of him during those final days and stuff, there are pictures of James and Ellen White behind him on his office wall. He followed the Adventist dietary rules still. I think they were still following the Sabbath, all kinds of stuff. And there's some, and I wish I had the numbers, but the large percentage of anyone who survived the compound went back to the Adventist church. So the people in the compound were like 89% or something Adventists anyway, who had gone to the Branch Davidians. So, I mean, the crossover there is ridiculous. And it was an Adventist organization. It was just a little too freaky for the main body of Adventists to say, okay, yeah. And so now they deny anything about it. Oh, no, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. And they scream and kick their little feet.
Of course they would, because, we know what happened there.
Yeah, he's not good for business.
I think that's the first time I heard about the Adventists. We haven't actually covered Waco or Koresh, just mostly for lack of survivors that are talking, and also we've tried to cover more recent things that are, still active, but here we are. It is still active. And I didn't realize I hadn't done that research yet. So thank you for educating us and our audience. And I guess we let's go to your story.
Yep.
All right.
Okay.
So you were born into it. And I have to say, I really loved the details in your book. Overall, just like the music, the fashion, how your hair changed, like what your hair had to go through.
That's what you got out of the book?
Like it's the details. Like it's specifically like the control about what had to happen. And this is as a woman, you're not going to get this, Nippy. But like what her mother did to her hair to be a certain, well, you never had to have your hair.
I did my hair.
No,
you don't get it once a year.
Tell us about what it was like growing up. And I know all those details in your book, but what was it like to be controlled to the level that you were? And give us some stories.
That is obviously one of the biggest themes in the book, was how that tight of a control just has to leak out somewhere. And for me, it leaked out very unhealthily. And we'll talk about that later. But from my earliest memories, we had no autonomy. You were not entitled to, our bodies were just, my mom would just yank us around or shove us here, sit us down, physically we were controlled. Absolutely. Even if it wasn't corporal punishment, which I got a lot because I was the strong-willed child, but my sister did not. And our looks and everything had to be absolutely exactly, I describe in the book how she would force these perms on our hair because straight hair was ugly, but you couldn't have the frizzy from the perm either. It had to then be put into hot rollers or sleep on rollers, etc. And then it had to be teased and sprayed and, all this stuff. Like there were all these steps to please my mother, which she said was to please my father and to be, church worthy, etc. So our bodies were controlled. And I talk a lot later about how when we were teenagers, then we were controlled to the extent of our weight and everything about that. And then our schools later on would get into it. Adventist schools had all these very strict, like I would be sent to the office where they kept a bottle of fingernail polish remover. If you were wearing colored fingernail polish, you had to remove it. And so you had absolutely nothing that was your own. We couldn't read things. We couldn't listen to things. And I always assumed that a lot of that was just my family, especially the look stuff. I thought, okay, that's just my family. But when I watched Shiny Happy People, I realized all those IBL women had been put through the exact same hair thing. Like Bill Gothard himself would be like, you have to have soft curls, but not to this or to that. And it was just like, oh my God, this is part of Christian patriarchy in general.
So there's crossovers there that
there were. And when I saw Shiny Happy People, I looked it up because, again, Adventists don't mix. They don't play well with others, right? But I looked it up. I was like, this can't be. And I realized that there is some documentation that Adventists were actually busing like loads of people to these IBLP seminars. And for a while, the largest percentage of Christians attending the IBLP seminars were Adventists. And I don't think my parents went to any because they were very Adventists are superior and we're the only people and we don't need to hear from anyone else. But I do think because we were homeschooled for a little while, and that was way back before there were any materials for homeschooling. Even Adventists didn't have them, but the IBLP did. So I would imagine, I don't know what materials we use, but I think probably our materials were IBLP. I think they were the only people doing it.
And I meant to ask this earlier. I don't want to get too bogged down in the biblicalness of it all, but what's the main sort of like difference between Adventists and, say, Baptists or like standard Christianity, for lack of a better word? Like, what's the belief there?
Yeah. We kind of skipped over that one here in the beginning. That's the big one that's in their name. They worship sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. And they think, and that they take from the 10 Commandments and they think that sets them apart. And they are the only true Christians because they observe the Sabbath. The true Sabbath. Okay. Yeah. And you do nothing except worship God from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday.
And that's early Testament, because that's what, devout Jews do, is follow the Shabbat, right? So it's got a little bit of Judaism in it. Like, is that the main difference, the Sabbath?
I think they would claim all kinds of, and I've been out of it for so long, and I never really cared for the theology, so I'm not sure. But so they do have several little theological things about how they interpret hell and how they interpret God coming back. They have little nitpicky things. Okay. But I think if you ask them one point that makes them different, it would be the Sabbath.
Okay.
I noticed, because your parents are pretty extreme, they removed you from really any other influences. And it's the impression I got from reading your book is that you kind of figured out the theology was like bogus, and you didn't let it, indoctrinate you you seem somewhat inoculated to it. I'm wondering how you knew to be inoculated when that started, even though your parents were kind of all in on it. What context did you have that gave you that kind of understanding?
It still is actually a little fuzzy to me. I don't know, because I just feel like I never, you know how they say we're all born atheist and then we get indoctrinated. And I just feel like my little atheist chip in there just kind of like still stayed, even though it was being crushed on a daily basis. Like it just, so much of it didn't make sense. I remember having conversations with my dad very early on about like, why did there have to be good and evil? And if there was a God and he created Satan, why? Because Satan did all this bad stuff, and all the explanations didn't make sense. Like they would say, oh, but free will. And I'd be like, whose free will? The dog that's getting beaten on the corner, or like the child who's being molested? Like, what are you talking about? And so it never made sense to me. But I think my personal breaking point was when I was about 10 maybe, and we had been allowed to do gymnastics. It was our one excursion outside the bubble. And once you start getting up in the ranks of gymnastics competition, everything is on Saturday. All the competitions are on Saturday.
Oh, right.
And the coaches don't want to spend any time with you if you're not competing and winning for them. So we were these kids on the team that all of a sudden were useless. And so we got just basically literally shoved to the side. And this was my biggest love in life. I lived for gymnastics. And at that point, I was just like, if there's a God and he's doing this to me and he's taking this away from me because of his stupid Sabbath, fuck him.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Fuck him.
And it just, from then on, I just couldn't believe any of it, really.
Let's take a little break from the cultiverse. Here's a word from our sponsors. Thank you for listening. Now, let's dive back into the cultiverse. I also thought that you had some contacts outside the bubble in addition to what you just said.
You moved a lot, yeah.
Yeah, you moved a lot, but also because you had books and you were into books. And even though you weren't allowed them, you found a way to smuggle them and go to the library and whatnot. And just a tangent, I was just curious, have you seen the movie or read the book or the play Matilda by Roald Dahl?
That is one of my kids' favorite movies when they were young, and I never watched it. So I've never read any of it.
I feel like you need to watch that immediately because we just saw it in London and it was incredible. It was incredible.
Oh,
but specifically, it's with this little girl who loves to read and she's so smart, and books are not allowed in her home and her parents are awful. And I was just like, as I was reading your book, I was like, she's a mini Matilda.
Is it only in musical form?
No, it's a book and it's a movie, and we saw the musical. And Melissa, you need to watch it after we get off this call.
I will. Okay. I just wrote it down like, my goodness. Okay, no one's ever told me that.
I got goosebumps when I made that connection. But anyway, back to your childhood. So that was a real turning point for you, and that was very clear. And then there was another one, I think, when you found a forbidden public school athlete to reclaim your autonomy. Would you like to tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I went through high school being absolutely a goody two-shoes. So I obeyed all the rules. Even though I didn't believe the theology, the behavioral control, first of all, I had no way out, but also I basically believed it all. I kind of believed the purity culture and that you needed to save yourself. And certainly I was just going to play along. Now in hindsight, I've caught up with a lot of people that I went to high school with, and everybody was doing shit. I didn't know that.
Nobody was talking about it.
Yeah. Nobody was talking about it, or at least they weren't talking about it to me. So I just was following the line. So I had barely, by the time I was a senior, I was 17, and I had barely even kissed anybody. And I just kind of realized I was planning my escape already. I'd applied to colleges outside of the Adventist circle. I had my eye on the prize, and I knew I needed experience in the outside world. I hadn't had no experience. And I had this aborted attempt at trying to gather the experience when I went to Boston for the summer between junior and senior year. And I worked for Joe Kennedy's first congressional campaign. And I thought that was my big break. And I was going to make friends, and I was going to have sex, and I was going to learn to drink and all this stuff. And it did not really happen that way. And people have to read the book to get that whole
it's a great section.
That was great.
I love that section. Yeah.
But so I came back my senior year and I was like, holy crap, it didn't work. I need to be experienced in the world before I am moving out there. And I just decided that all of the adults, what were they the most afraid of? They weren't afraid of me turning Catholic or, converting to Buddhism or something. They were afraid I was going to have sex. Like that was the big obsession, which of course goes all the way back to Kellogg and Ellen White, right? Mm-hmm. But I didn't know that at the time. And so I was like, I'm going to go find out what it is. They're hiding something from me and they suck. And so I knew I couldn't do anything within the Adventist system because everybody talks and none of the Adventist boys interested me anyway. So I literally just went down to the local public school and I started going to sports games. And I picked out a guy that I thought was just absolutely gorgeous. And I was like, that's him. And so I tracked down where he worked and I went in and introduced myself. And a couple weeks later, I was without my virginity, and people can read that in the book.
I love that story.
Blow by blow. Yeah. But it was a really important, I don't think too many people have gone about it like that. But
I think more than you would suspect. Yeah.
I guess maybe. Yeah. Hopefully, because I only have good memories of it. I don't have any. I think it was a grand way to go about it. It did leave me, it did confirm for me that sex didn't have any deeper meaning.
Right.
And
you weren't going to go to hell.
Was something that I had to deal with later in life a lot, because from then on, I was just like, sex is sex.
But it can be transactional.
That's it. And to me, it always was, because they had always, I feel like sex was owned by them who controlled us so much by the time I actually had it that it never belonged to me anyway. Like by actually having sex, I was just proving them wrong, but I wasn't claiming anything for myself. I didn't have any definition for it that then I was like, hey, and I've made it this for me. I was just like, fuck you all. See, look, it's nothing. And so that kind of became my MO for several decades and was not particularly a healthy, probably, way to go about processing it afterward. But that initial intro and removal, just like shredding of my virginity, was great.
Well, I think it's funny reading that.
I cheered for you.
Yeah, reading that. I mean, my virginity was something I wanted to get over with, and I grew up, I'd say, in a pretty much healthy atmosphere. I think a lot of people go through, I want to get this.
I want to do this
big thing that's supposed to be, it's over with, and it can feel transactional. And then later on, you learn, oh, this is a person I connect with, and then sex becomes a natural progression of that rather than
yeah. I mean, of course, for women, we were told that it was our only bargaining chip in life. We had to hold on to that virginity or we were useless, and
which that's is still reinforced by our culture, outside of that. So I don't know that you getting a worldly experience would have, I'm sure it would have, you had an extreme version of that, but when you get out of that, I think it's still, women are still taught that to a certain degree.
And we've done, even though we haven't covered the Adventists, we've covered a lot of Christian fundamentalist offshoots, and almost everyone has some metaphor that you're taught. You don't want to be a withered rose or a chewed up piece of gum. Yours was a shirt. Can you tell us what you learned with the fresh shirt? Because that was such a great, by the way, your book, the details in your memories in your book are just so juicy. Tell us about the book. I'm sorry. Tell us about the shirt metaphor.
Oh, yeah, the shirt.
Yeah. So our teacher he would use it multiple times of, girls, do you want to be the brand new shirt in the package, all folded and clean and neat? Or do you want to be the dirty, used, sweated in, stretched out shirt that's tried on by so many men and thrown on the floor and trampled? Like he would get really graphic about how, that shirt was just going to be like, and it was very vivid. It was pretty traumatizing,
Yeah, that's a very powerful metaphor.
Yeah.
It's fucked up because religion is supposed to be a place where, you're consummating birth theoretically when you're having sex, and that's what they do to that. And religion is supposed to be a place where you take care of that, and there's a sanctity to it. Right?
Yeah.
Instead, it's like, why would you want to go have kids?
Yes.
Like, why poison that well? It's a lot of incongruencies. Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard from so many people who didn't go the path that I did. Obviously, I think the main path was get married really early because that was your only passed to have sex. So everybody got married so young just so they could have sex. And then a lot of people found that exactly that, what you were saying, is sex was still dirty to them because it had been built up as that forever. You don't just flip the switch once you're married and all of a sudden it's great and groovy and easy. Both men and women, I think, had lasting trauma from those horrible metaphors and feeling like it was now something marvelous. And
also, you're not a shirt.
Yeah, you're not an object.
What about the bastards ruining the shirts too?
Yeah, well, right,
exactly.
What about those guys?
What about the sweaty fucker stretching out the shirt?
What about the guys stretching you
exactly. out? Don't you know how to wear a shirt?
Jesus, put the shirt on, right?
Put deodorant on or shower.
And clean it and put it back. Like, what the fuck?
Which goes to the whole point of that all, and this is one of my notes from later in the book, but I'll bring it up now.
Destroy that metaphor for you. You're
but
welcome.
Well, just that men's indiscretion is always the woman's fault.
It's never accountable. Yeah.
Like, it's always the woman's fault.
Well, it seems to me the male libido at that age needs to be under a little bit more scrutiny than the women's, at that age.
Well, just that men should have any responsibility. Like, there's so much that happens to you and in your book. It's, obviously your biography and all the things that happen in your marriages. I don't want to skim over those things, but I also, want to leave some.
This is where we plug the book.
Yeah, the books is just so juicy. Can't wait to finish it after this interview. So before we go to break, tell us a little bit about, how you left the church and, the key things we need to know about your marriages before you really fully confronted the structures that you grew up in.
Yeah. So, shortly after that, high school, seducing the sports star guy, when I graduated, that was just like my drop dead date. I was out of the church and I had already applied to schools. I didn't get into the ones I wanted to. So I spent a year in Europe at one of the Adventist schools there, but that was far enough away from home and a little bit looser. We were allowed to just run around Europe on the weekends. So I got a lot of real world experience there. And then I ended up in universities that were not Adventist. And that was like an explosive time of growth. Particularly my time at Barnard College was just, oh my God, learning critical thinking and making real world friends for the first time. Just like it was so incredible. And I had 1 year at Barnard before my mom and I think the larger dynamics of my family pulled me out of school because they were losing control of me. And I refused to go home and be controlled again. And so I was literally penniless in New York, like penniless. And I had always wanted to be an actor. So I started acting and I just moved in with the first guy that I was an acting partner of mine. And from there on, I went on to probably 10 years of very controlling relationships with, I went back to that religious dynamic of women being controlled by men and being completely submissive and obedient. I did get to finish college, but it was as a day student. It was while I was living with the boyfriend. So I was no longer experiencing any great growth. I was just checking academic boxes. And I ended up being just completely controlled and submissive, giving up all my hopes and dreams, my intellectual growth. And the men I was involved with, that first boyfriend and then my first husband, were much older than I was, very conservative. And I ended up, not knowing until much later, basically doing exactly what I would have been doing as an Adventist kid. But I thought I was so out, so free, and I wasn't.
Right. It was really heartbreaking to read. You basically landed up in a coercive, controlling environment without the religion. Same thing, but without the religion. Yeah, it was really...
Exact same thing.
Yeah. Because you hadn't...
Same structure.
You hadn't processed what had happened to you. And one of the things I was so aware of is that you didn't have, because you didn't have any outside pop culture or template or, a movie reference. You talk about this a lot in your book. Just you didn't have that scene where the person... stands up and does the confrontation. You didn't have any template. Yeah. You didn't have any, any ways out.
Yeah. Yeah. And we had been taught, obviously, that confrontation was absolutely, you don't confront things. I had never had, and I ended up initiating affairs with someone else to get out of a relationship that I was with, not because it was that I needed the affair, but because I didn't know how to break up a relationship. And I was miserable in the relationship I was in, but I didn't know how to just have a conversation and hold my boundaries and say my feelings. And I didn't even know what my feelings were. So it was very easy to be like, oh my gosh, I want to be involved with this person and run off, because I had no skills. We were given no skills to operate in life.
And that affair ended up in your second marriage and having children with a man who, how would you describe that in a nutshell?
It's funny. I had these moments. You know how they say leaving an abusive relationship takes people, like on average, I think 7 tries. And I feel like the abusive relationship was me and my family and my church in the very beginning. And I had these little moments, like going to Barnard was that little moment where I was, or even the first one was probably the Kennedy campaign, right? And then I got sucked back in. And then Barnard was, I had this little moment of freedom. And then I got sucked back in, all because I had no skills and I didn't know what I was doing, And so I feel like my second husband was another one of those little opportunities where I could have really stayed and committed to that relationship. And it wasn't perfect. He was a total party guy who just wanted to have fun in life. And having a really complicated family life with someone like that leaves you pretty alone. But he was a good guy. It was a good relationship overall. And I could have made it work if either he or I had the skills to address what was going on or what we needed or anything. And we didn't.
Right.
We both just ended up drinking and living our separate lives, And so that was yet another chance that could have been the big breaking point if I had the skills and the knowledge that I needed, therapy and all these other things.
Yeah. Right. And amidst all that, you get some news.
Yes.
Some pretty groundbreaking news.
The life-changing news.
The life-changing news, which I think we're going to have to wait for part 2 to hear what happened that really shatters everything.
You just did a cliffhanger.
That was a cliffhanger. Stay tuned for part 2 with Melissa Duge Spiers. Cannot wait to hear what happens, how you've recovered, and all the things that have occurred since. See you then.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. Hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
We hope you're enjoying A Little Bit Culty. If so, please do show us some love. Drop a rating or leave a review. Hit subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/alittlebitculty.
Even better, send this episode to someone who needs it. Maybe they're in a cult. Maybe they're just a little bit susceptible. Or maybe they just love a good story. Spread the word, spread the love. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
A Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production.
Executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames in collaboration with producer Will Rutherford at Citizens of Sound. Our co-creator is Jess Temple Tardy.
Our production coordinator is Leslie Dinsmore.
Writing by Sandra Namoto and social media marketing by Eric Swarzinski and Brooke Keene.
Our theme song, Cultivated, is by the artists John Bryant and Nigel Aslan.